Supreme General Vexlar stood on the command deck of his warship, arms folded behind his back, as he studied the small blue-green planet on the view screen. His scaled skin reflected the dim lighting, and his 4 eyes narrowed in thought. Primitive, he said to no one in particular. Another world of primitives. His second-in-command, Officer Krell, approached with a data tablet. The humans have only colonized this world for 15 cycles, General. Their defenses are minimal. Our scans detect only basic energy weapons and a small garrison. Vexlar nodded slowly. The Krylorian Empire had conquered 17 species across 3 sectors of the galaxy. Humans would become the 18th. It was simply the way of things. Begin the standard protocol. Send the diplomatic team first, followed by our protection detail, Vexlar ordered, his mouth curving into what passed for a smile among his kind. Down on Terran Outpost Delta 9, Dr. Alan Reeves finished setting a broken arm on a mining worker. The colony was still being built, and accidents happened often enough to keep the medical bay busy. There you go, Frank. Try not to use that arm for heavy lifting for at least 3 weeks, Alan said, securing the cast. Doc, with all due respect, we're behind schedule on the Eastern Quadrant. I can't just sit around, Frank protested. Alan was about to respond when the colony-wide alarm began to sound. He recognized the pattern immediately. Unknown ships in orbit. First contact protocol. Major Samantha Wright's voice came over the speakers. All personnel, this is not a drill. Unknown vessels have entered orbit and are deploying smaller craft. All civilians proceed to designated shelters. Defense teams to your stations. Medical staff prepare for potential casualties. Alan looked at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the sky beyond. Frank, get to a shelter. Now. In the colony's command center, Major Wright watched the approaching alien ships on the main display. Her short blonde hair was pulled back tightly, and her face showed no emotion despite the tension in the room. Put me through to the approaching vessels, she ordered. A communications officer nodded. Channel open. Major. This is Major Samantha Wright of Terran Outpost Delta 9. We are a peaceful research and mining colony. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came quickly in perfect English. This is the diplomatic envoy of the Krylorian Empire. We wish to establish relations with your species. Request permission to land a small delegation. Samantha exchanged glances with her advisors. Permission granted for 5 representatives to land at coordinates we will transmit. We will meet you there. 30 minutes later, Samantha led a small team to the landing zone. Dr. Reeves was among them. Standard protocol for first contact situations. Show the aliens that humans cared about health and well-being. 2 armed security officers flanked them. The Krylorian shuttle was sleek and predatory-looking. When the door opened, 5 tall reptilian beings emerged. Their bodies were covered in iridescent scales, and they had 4 eyes set in faces that reminded Alan of Earth's Komodo dragons. The lead alien stepped forward. I am Diplomatic Overseer Zex. We bring greetings from Supreme General Vexlar of the Krylorian Empire. Samantha nodded. Welcome to Delta 9. I am Major Wright, the colony administrator. This is Dr. Reeves, our chief medical officer, and Lieutenant Mills and Sergeant Cooper, our security team. The alien's 4 eyes blinked in different patterns, and its gaze fixed on the weapons carried by the security officers. Something in its posture changed. You bring weapons to a diplomatic meeting? Zex asked, voice suddenly cold. Standard security protocol, Samantha explained. They're just a precaution. The alien made a clicking sound. The Krylorian Empire views armed escorts at diplomatic functions as signs of hostility or bad faith. Before Samantha could respond, dozens of armed Krylorians emerged from the shuttle. They were clearly soldiers with armor and weapons far more advanced than anything the humans carried. Supreme General Vexlar has ordered a containment operation, Zex announced. Your colony will now be under Krylorian protection. Resistance will be met with force. Samantha's hand moved toward her communicator. This is an act-off. The Krylorian soldiers opened fire. Lieutenant Mills fell first, then Sergeant Cooper as they moved to protect the others. Samantha grabbed Alan and pulled him behind a supply crate. Colony Command, this is right. We are under attack. Initiate Emergency Protocol Delta. This is not a drill. She shouted into her communicator as the sound of alien weapons filled the air. Alarms blared throughout the colony as Krylorian ships descended from the sky. Dr. Alan Reeves ran through the chaos toward the medical center, ducking as an explosion rocked a nearby building. This way, Major Wright shouted, pulling him into a side alley as debris rained down. We need to get to command. The medical center was only 2 blocks away. Alan hesitated. My patience. I need to coordinate our defense, Samantha said, her face grim. But you're right. Get to your people, Doc. Save who you can. She pressed her sidearm into his hand. Take this. Alan stared at the weapon. I have my own. He pulled out a standard-issue pistol from his medical bag. Samantha gave a tight nod. See you on the other side, she said, then sprinted toward the command center. The medical center was already filling with wounded when Alan burst through the doors. Nurse Kelly Martinez was directing the flow of patients, her uniform already stained with blood. Dr. Reeves. Thank God, she called. We got 12 wounded so far, 3 critical. Alan rolled up his sleeves. Let's get to work, and Kelly, make sure everyone is armed. She nodded without question and passed the word to the other staff. In human colonies, all medical personnel received basic combat training. It wasn't what they were best at, but they could defend their patients if needed. Outside, the colony's small defense force engaged the Krylorians. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but fought fiercely to buy time for civilians to reach the shelters. In orbit, Supreme General Vexlar received the first reports with satisfaction. The perimeter defenses are falling as expected, Officer Krell informed him. Our ground forces are moving inward to the central structures. Casualties? Vexlar asked. Minimal. The humans fight well for primitives, but their weapons are ineffective against our armor. Vexlar nodded. And our diplomatic team. Returning to the ship, they report the humans brought weapons to the meeting. The general's 4 eyes blinked in different patterns. As expected, these humans understand only force. He paused, then added, send a team to capture their command center. I want their leader alive. Back in the medical center, Alan worked frantically to save a young woman with shrapnel wounds. I need more blood, he called out. The building shook as something exploded nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling. They're getting closer, Kelly said, handing him a plasma unit. We should move the patients to the underground levels. Alan nodded. Start the evacuation. Critical patients first. As the medical team worked to move patients, 3 Krylorian scouts breached the main entrance. They moved with predatory grace, weapons raised. Hostiles in the building, shouted a medical orderly named Ben. Kelly dropped the supplies she was carrying and drew her sidearm in one smooth motion. 2 other nurses did the same. Alan finished placing a pressure bandage on his patient, then pulled his own weapon. The Krylorians paused, clearly surprised. One of them spoke into a communication device. Command, the healing center is defended by armed personnel. Whatever response they received caused them to advance again. Kelly fired first, hitting the lead alien in the shoulder. It wasn't a killing shot, but the Krylorian staggered back. Get the patients moving. Alan shouted, taking cover behind an overturned gurney. He fired twice, forcing the other aliens to seek cover. One of the Krylorians, an officer named Zivrin, moved to flank the defenders. Ben spotted him and fired, hitting Zivrin in the leg. The alien collapsed with a hissing cry of pain. In the confusion, Kelly and 2 orderlies pressed the advantage, driving the remaining Krylorians back toward the entrance. After a brief firefight, the aliens retreated, dragging their wounded officer with them. But in the narrow doorway, they were forced to leave Zivran behind. Alan approached the wounded alien cautiously, weapon still raised. Zivran looked up at him with all four eyes wide, clearly expecting to be executed. Instead, Alan holstered his weapon and knelt beside the injured Krylorian. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, opening his medical bag. "I'm a doctor. Let me see that wound." On his command ship, General Vexlar received a puzzling report. "Sir, our scouts encountered armed resistance in what appears to be their medical facility." Vexlar's scales shifted color slightly. "Their healers fight." "Interesting." Zivran watched with wide eyes as Dr. Reeves cleaned his wound. The human's hands moved with practiced skill, first removing the alien's leg armor, then cleaning the injury with antiseptic. "Why do you help me?" Zivran asked in halting English. His translator device worked well enough for basic communication. Alan didn't look up from his work. "Because you're hurt, and I'm a doctor. That's what we do." He began to close the wound with a medical sealer. "This should stop the bleeding, but you'll need to stay off this leg for at least a few days." The alien's four eyes blinked in confusion. In Krylorian army, wounded are left unless they can still fight. Alan finally looked at Zivran's face. "That's not how humans do things." Nearby, Kelly was helping move patients to the lower levels. She paused beside Alan. "Dr. Reeves, we need to move him too. The upper floor isn't safe." "Help me get him up," Alan said. Together, they lifted the surprised alien onto a gurney. Zivran stared at the weapon holstered at Kelly's side, then at the medical equipment in her hands. "You are healer, but you fight. Why?" Kelly checked his vital signs on a portable monitor. "Because sometimes you have to do both. We protect our patients." In the colony's command center, Major Wright coordinated what defenses remained. The building shook as another bombardment hit nearby. "Status report," she demanded. A communications officer looked up from his station. "The east and north sectors have fallen. We're holding in the central and western areas. The U.S. horizon has acknowledged our distress call, but they're 3 days out at maximum speed." Samantha's face showed no emotion, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the command table. "And the civilians?" "About 60% made it to the shelters. The rest." The officer didn't finish. "What about the medical center?" "Still operational. Dr. Reeves reports they've moved to the underground facilities. They have 23 wounded." And he paused, looking at his screen. "One Krylorian prisoner." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "They captured one." "No, ma'am. They're treating one." On his command ship, General Vexlar reviewed the holographic map of the colony. The human resistance was stronger than expected. Not enough to win, but enough to be annoying. "Our forces have secured the eastern quadrant," Officer Krull reported. "But the humans are using the underground tunnel systems to move between sectors. It's slowing our advance." Vexlar made a dismissive gesture. "They are merely delaying the inevitable." "What of their command center?" "Still holding. Their leader, the female called Wright, has proven resourceful." Vexlar's scales rippled in what might have been appreciation. "And what of our wounded officer, Zivran?" Krell hesitated. "He was left behind during the retreat from their medical facility. Presumed dead or captured." "Find out," Vexlar ordered. "I want to know what happens to our people when these humans capture them." In the underground medical facility, Alan checked on Zivran again. The alien was resting on a bed, watching the humans with obvious curiosity. "How is the pain?" Alan asked. "Manageable," Zivran replied. "Your medicine works on my kind." "Good. Basic biology isn't that different across species, it seems." Alan pulled up a stool and sat beside the bed. "We need to talk. Your people are killing mine. I need to know why." Zivran's scales darkened slightly. "It is the way of the Empire. We find new worlds. We bring them into the Empire, whether they want to join or not." "Exactly." The alien seemed puzzled by the question. Alan sighed. And what happens to the people who were already living there? They serve, or they die. It is simple. Alan stood up. Nothing about this is simple. A commotion at the far end of the room caught his attention. 2 human soldiers were brought in, badly wounded from a firefight. Zivaran watched as all the medical personnel moved with urgency. They worked to save the injured soldiers, their hands sure despite the noise and chaos. Then the alien noticed something strange. A Krylorian communication device on one of the soldiers. They had taken it from a dead Krylorian. Kelly saw his interest. Yes, we've been listening to your military channels. Not that it helps much when we're outnumbered 10-1. Zivaran looked at her, then at the wounded humans being treated, then back at his own bandaged leg. Something seemed to trouble him deeply. In Krylorian army, he said slowly, medics do not carry weapons. They stay in safe areas. They do not risk themselves for the wounded. Kelly checked a patient's vitals before responding. Then who protects your wounded on the battlefield? No one, Zivaran said simply. If you cannot fight, you are no longer useful. Kelly stared at him. That's a terrible way to treat your own people. Dawn broke over the colony, casting long shadows across the damaged buildings. The attack had continued through the night, but the humans had managed to hold several key positions. Now, in the brief quiet of early morning, Major Wright gathered her remaining officers in the command center. The eastern sector is lost, she said, pointing to the holographic map. But we've set up strong points here, here, and here. The Krylorians seem to be regrouping for now. Lieutenant Greg Patterson, his face streaked with dirt and fatigue, studied the map. We need to retake the communications array. If we can boost our signal, we might be able to call for help from the mining outpost on the moon. Samantha nodded. Take 6 people. Get it done. As the officers dispersed, Samantha received a call from the medical center. Dr. Reeves appeared on the small screen, looking tired but determined. Major, we're setting up a forward aid station near the western barricade. We got too many wounded to move safely to the bunkers. Is that wise, Alan? You'll be right in the line of fire. Alan's expression was grim. We don't have a choice. People will die if we don't get to them quickly. Understood. I'll send what protection I can spare. She hesitated. What about your Krylorian patient? Zivaran. He's recovering. And talking. I think he's starting to question some things about his people's methods. On his command ship, General Vexlar listened to the latest reports with growing frustration. The humans were proving more resilient than expected. How are they still resisting? He demanded. They have inferior weapons, inferior numbers, and inferior tactics. Officer Krell approached cautiously. Sir, we've observed something unusual. Their medical personnel are establishing treatment centers near the front lines. They move through the battlefield, retrieving wounded while under fire. Vexlar's 4 eyes narrowed. And they are armed, sir. They fight and heal. Our soldiers report confusion when confronted with enemies who stop shooting to help their fallen, then resume fighting moments later. Vexlar paced the command deck. This makes no tactical sense. Why risk healers in combat? There's more, sir, Krell added. Our surveillance shows they treat all wounded they find, regardless of which side they fought for. Vexlar stopped pacing. Find me Zivaran. I want to know if he's being tortured for information. Near the western barricade, Dr. Reeves and his team had set up a makeshift field hospital. They worked rapidly, treating the wounded who were brought in from the fighting only 100 yards away. Alan finished sealing a chest wound on a young colony guard. Keep pressure here, he instructed a volunteer. Then he grabbed his medical bag and sidearm. Where are you going? Kelly asked, looking up from the patient she was treating. There are wounded in the no man's land between us and the Krylorian line. I'm going to get them. Kelly wiped blood from her forehead. Not alone, you're not. Together with 2 other medical staff, they moved out toward the battlefield. They wore bright armbands with the medical symbol, but kept their weapons ready. They reached the first wounded soldier quickly. As Alan began emergency treatment, Kelly and the others formed a protective ring around them, weapons aimed outward. A group of Krylorian soldiers spotted them and began to advance. Kelly raised her weapon, but held her fire. "We are medical personnel treating the wounded," she called out. "We will not fire unless fired upon." The Krylorians hesitated, clearly confused by the situation. One of them spoke into a communication device. In that moment, Zivran's voice came over their comm system. He had convinced a human guard to let him speak. "Do not attack the human healers," he said in the Krylorian language. "They treated me when I was wounded. They treat all wounded, even enemies." The Krylorian soldiers looked at each other in confusion, but lowered their weapons slightly. Alan, unaware of what Zivran had done, finished stabilizing the wounded soldier. "Ready to move," he said. As they carried the soldier back toward their lines, the Krylorians watched but did not fire. Lieutenant Patterson and his small team moved through the maintenance tunnels, heading toward the communications array. The going was slow, as they had to avoid Krylorian patrols. "Almost there," Greg whispered, checking his scanner. "Looks like only 3 guards on the outer perimeter." His team readied their weapons. They were all exhausted, but determined. If they could call for help from the moon base, they might just survive this invasion. On the command ship, Vexlar watched the unusual standoff between his troops and the human medics with growing curiosity. The Krylorian soldiers surrounded the small medical team before they could retreat to safety. Despite Kelly's attempt to fight back, they were quickly overwhelmed and their weapons taken. "We are medical personnel," Alan insisted as they were searched for additional weapons. "Under every civilized convention of war, we should be allowed to treat the wounded." The Krylorian squad leader ignored him. "General Vexlar wants to speak with human healers. You will come with us." They were marched to a Krylorian shuttle and flown to the command ship in orbit. The vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of the largest human ships Alan had ever seen. The interior was dimly lit with a reddish glow that made the scaled soldiers look even more intimidating. On the bridge, General Vexlar sat in a large command chair. His uniform was more elaborate than the other Krylorians, with metallic emblems that caught the light as he moved. All 4 of his eyes focused on the humans as they were brought before him. "So," Vexlar said, his voice deep and resonant, "these are the famous human healers who also fight." He stood and approached them, studying them closely. "Which of you is the leader?" Alan stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Alan Reeves, Chief Medical Officer for the colony." Vexlar circled him slowly. "Doctor, a healer, yet you carry a weapon and engage in combat. Explain this contradiction." "There's no contradiction," Alan replied, meeting the alien's gaze. "We're trained to heal, but also to protect our patients. If someone threatens those under our care, we'll defend them." Vexlar made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Inefficient. A warrior should fight. A healer should heal. Mixing the two diminishes both skills." "With respect, General, our history proves otherwise," Kelly interjected. "Human combat medics have served in wars for centuries. We found that having medical personnel on the battlefield saves lives and improves morale." Vexlar turned his attention to her. "You are Nurse Kelly Martinez, and you believe this dual role is effective." "I know it is," she said firmly. "We don't just treat our own. On Earth, combat medics have often provided care to enemy wounded as well." This seemed to genuinely surprise the general. "You treat enemies. Why waste resources on those who tried to kill you?" Before Kelly could answer, alarms blared throughout the ship. A Krylorian officer rushed to Vexlar's side. "Sir, the humans have retaken their communications array. They've contacted their moon base and are requesting reinforcements." Vexlar's scales darkened with anger. "How many ships do they have at this moon base?" "Unknown, sir, but our sensors detect energy signatures consistent with human military vessels leaving the far side of the moon." The general turned back to the human captives. "Your people fight well, but it will not save them. The Krylorian Empire has never been defeated. At that moment, several wounded Krylorian soldiers were brought onto the bridge. They had been injured in the fighting near the communications array. One was bleeding severely from a wound in his neck. Without hesitation, Kelly stepped toward the injured soldier. He's going to bleed out if that wound isn't treated immediately. The Krylorian guards raised their weapons, but Vexillar held up a hand to stop them. "What would you do, human?" "Save his life, if you'll let me," she replied simply. Vexillar studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Show me." Kelly knelt beside the wounded soldier, and Alan joined her. The Krylorians watched in silence as the human medics worked quickly to stop the bleeding and stabilize the injured alien. "He needs surgery," Alan said finally, looking up at Vexillar. "But he'll survive if he gets it soon." Vexillar's 4 eyes blinked in an unreadable pattern. "You would help one who was trying to kill your people just hours ago." "He's not trying to kill anyone now," Alan replied. "He's just a wounded soldier who needs medical attention." In the colony below, Lieutenant Patterson's team had succeeded in their mission. The communications array was back online, and they had contacted the mining outpost on the moon. Help was on the way. Major Wright received the news with the first real smile in days. "How long until they get here?" "The moon base had 3 armed transport ships," Greg reported. "They're loaded with security personnel and are on their way now. ETA 4 hours. "Good work, Lieutenant. Now we just need to hold out a little longer." She looked at the tactical display, noting the positions of the Krylorian forces. Any word from Dr. Reeves and his team? Greg's expression darkened. "They were captured near the western barricade. Witnesses say they were taken to the Krylorian command ship." Samantha's face hardened. "Keep fighting. We'll get them back." 3 hours passed as Alan and Kelly worked in the Krylorian medical bay. They moved from patient to patient, treating wounds and stabilizing the injured aliens. The Krylorian medics watched with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Their biological structure is fascinating," Alan said quietly as he sealed a wound on a Krylorian soldier's arm. "Similar to reptiles on Earth, but more complex." Kelly nodded as she prepared another dose of pain medication, "and they respond well to our treatments. The basic principles of medicine seem to be universal." A Krylorian officer entered the medical bay and approached them. "General Vexillar demands your presence on the bridge." When they arrived, they found Vexillar studying a large tactical display. The image showed 3 human ships approaching from the moon. "Your reinforcements will arrive soon," Vexillar said without turning around. "They think they are coming to your rescue." Alan and Kelly exchanged glances but remained silent. "I could destroy them easily," the general continued. "Our weapons are far superior to anything humans have developed." He finally turned to face them. "But that would be a waste of resources." "What do you want from us?" Alan asked. "Information," Vexillar replied. "Your approach to warfare is unusual. In 17 conquered systems, we have never encountered a species that trains its healers to fight, or that treats enemy wounded in the midst of battle." Kelly stepped forward. "It's not just a military strategy, General. It's a reflection of our values. We believe all life has worth, even the lives of our enemies." Vexillar's 4 eyes blinked in different patterns. "This is inefficient. The purpose of war is to defeat the enemy, not to care for them." "With respect," Alan said, "the purpose of war should be to achieve peace, and how you fight determines what kind of peace you'll have afterward." Before Vexillar could respond, Officer Krell approached with a data tablet. "Sir, we've received a transmission from High Command. They're inquiring about our progress with the human colony." Vexillar took the tablet and read the message. His scales shifted color slightly. "They are impatient. They expected this world to be conquered by now." He looked at the humans, then at the tactical display showing the approaching ships. Finally, he made a decision. "Order our ground forces to pull back to defensive positions and prepare my shuttle. I wish to see this human medical approach for myself." Down in the colony, Major Wright received unexpected news. "Ma'am, the Krylorians are retreating from the central and western sectors," a young officer reported, disbelief evident in his voice. Samantha studied the tactical display, looking for the trap. "They're not retreating. They're repositioning." "But why?" "The ships from the moon base will be here in less than an hour," Greg reminded her. "Maybe they're preparing for that." "Maybe," Samantha said, unconvinced. "But something doesn't feel right. Keep everyone on alert." A communication officer called out, "Major, we're receiving a transmission from the Krylorian command ship. They're requesting permission to land a shuttle in the central plaza." "Why would they ask permission now after invading us?" Samantha wondered aloud. "The message says General Vexlar wishes to observe our medical facilities." Samantha's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is this some kind of trick?" "They're also offering to return Dr. Reeves and Nurse Martinez as a show of good faith." After a moment of thought, Samantha nodded. "Tell them they can land one shuttle with no more than 5 personnel. Any sign of weapons, and we open fire." 30 minutes later, a small Krylorian shuttle descended toward the central plaza. A security team led by Lieutenant Patterson secured the area, weapons ready. The shuttle door opened, and Alan and Kelly emerged first, followed by General Vexlar and 2 Krylorian guards. "Dr. Reeves," Greg called out. "Are you all right?" Alan nodded. "We're fine, Lieutenant. The General wants to observe how we treat our wounded." Vexlar stepped forward, his imposing figure drawing all eyes. "I have ordered my forces to stand down temporarily. I wish to understand this human approach to medicine and warfare." Greg kept his weapon ready. "Major Wright is waiting at the medical center. She'll want to speak with you directly." As they walked through the damaged colony, Vexlar observed the aftermath of his attack. Humans were clearing rubble, treating injured people in makeshift aid stations, and preparing defenses. "Your people are resilient," Vexlar noted. "Most species surrender after the first day of assault." "Humans don't give up easily," Alan replied, "especially when fighting for our homes." Vexlar stood silent for a long moment, considering Ziverin's words. Around them, the human medical team continued their work, treating wounded from both sides with equal care. "General," Major Wright said as she entered the medical facility, "I understand you wanted to observe our operations." The Krylorian general turned to face her. "Yes. Your approach is unlike anything we have encountered in our conquests." "This isn't about conquest for us," Samantha replied. "We're defending our home." Before Vexlar could respond, an alarm sounded. A communications officer rushed into the room. "Major, the ships from the moon base have arrived, but they're under attack." Krylorian vessels opened fire as soon as they entered orbit. Vexlar's scales changed color in surprise. "I gave no such order." He activated his communication device. "This is Supreme General Vexlar. All ships are to cease fire immediately." After a moment, Officer Krell's voice responded. "Sir, High Command issued a direct override. They've taken control of our battle systems. They say you've been compromised by human influence." Vexlar's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. "I am the Supreme General of this fleet. No one overrides my authority." The transmission came from War Commander Zextor himself. "Sir." Vexlar turned to the humans. "It seems my superiors have lost patience with my methods." Another explosion rocked the colony. The lights flickered. "They're bombing us again," someone shouted. "General, call off your forces," Samantha demanded. "I cannot," Vexlar admitted. "My authority has been superseded." He paused, then made a decision. "But I can help you defend yourselves. My shuttle has access codes that could temporarily disable their targeting systems." Alan stared at him in disbelief. "You would help us against your own people." "I would prevent an unnecessary slaughter," Vexlar replied. "Your species deserves better than extinction." The building shook again, more violently this time. Part of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris crashing down. Vexlar pushed Samantha out of the way as a support beam fell. It struck the general instead, pinning him to the floor. "General," Zivran called out in alarm. Alan rushed to Vexillar's side. Even with a quick glance, he could see the injuries were severe. The Krylorian's tough-scaled body had been crushed, and dark fluid seeped onto the floor. "Get me a medical scanner," Alan ordered, "and help me lift this beam." Several people worked together to free the injured general. Alan began treatment immediately, with Kelly assisting. "Internal bleeding," Alan muttered. "Multiple fractures. His cardiovascular system is failing." Despite the chaos around them, the medical team worked with focused precision. Outside, the battle had resumed in full force. The colony's defenses, along with the ships from the moon base, fought against the Krylorian fleet. "We need to move him to surgery," Alan said. Kelly prepped the theater. As they prepared to move Vexillar, a group of Krylorian soldiers breached the perimeter, fighting their way toward the medical facility. They had been sent to retrieve their general. "They're coming for him," Samantha warned, readying her weapon. Zivran, despite his injured leg, stood and took a position near the door. "I will explain to them. They must understand." The Krylorian soldiers burst into the facility, weapons raised. They were met by armed medical personnel and security officers, with Zivran standing between them. "Stand down," Zivran ordered in their language. "The general is injured. The humans are trying to save him." The lead soldier hesitated. "Our orders are to retrieve Supreme General Vexillar and eliminate all humans in this facility." "I countermand those orders," Zivran replied. "By the authority of Vexillar's second-in-command." In the operating theater, Alan and Kelly fought to save the general's life. Their hands moved with practiced skill, closing wounds and stabilizing vital systems. "His pulse is weakening," Kelly warned. Vexillar's 4 eyes opened. Despite his injuries, he seemed fully aware. "Doctor," he said, his voice barely audible, "I need to record a message." Elen nodded to Kelly, who brought a recording device. "This is Supreme General Vexillar of the Krylorian Empire," he began, his voice growing weaker with each word. "I have observed the humans of Earth and find them to be honorable adversaries worthy of diplomatic resolution rather than conquest." He paused, struggling to continue. "Their culture contains wisdom our empire lacks. Their healers carry weapons not from bloodthirst, but from devotion to protecting the vulnerable. Even now, as I lie dying by a human hand, they fight to save me." "We're not going to let you die," Alan insisted, continuing to work.